chilly, waterlogged, wind-swept crickets. Are we hearing it? Are you looking out in the nation, around the world actually, and seeing how we're not actually doing anything for all the noise that the crickets make? The crickets are not actually doing anything but being crickets. I understand 1 million people or so, the million men, million oppressed march over in New York. Tons of people. You know, and Monday's going to roll around, and I'll bet not one goes into anywhere they need to go and just presses on the government to stop what oppresses them. You know, we have this right, everyone kind of focuses. I think these were all traps. The more I've been looking at all this, these things, these accoutrements of what we were called was freedom, this experiment that they've really done us over with, that we have a right to a free speech, and everyone thinks that's what gives them the right to go out and protest. And that does protect them in the protest. Otherwise, you see how quickly the government becomes the beast that it actually always has been. Any government. You had to literally write it into a bill of rights. It came actually a year later after the establishment of a federal government, a federated government of states coming together to have its agent actually. How that idea has been thrown out the window, no one noticed, is kind of amazing to me. But you had to write a year later. It had to be written in that you had to write of the freedom of the press, and what else, folks? And this is where people I think are really missing it. You had the right to petition for a redress of grievance. Now, I guess that could be going out in the streets, but I don't think so. I don't think actually petitioning is not necessarily standing with a sign. And I guess I just want to focus just quickly here. I think we've missed the mark on this. First of all, the oppression that was the experiment called America that was supposed to live. We were supposed to live in freedom and liberty, and no one noticed the truth about it. It didn't mean that it wasn't available. It didn't mean that it was a good idea, and it didn't mean that a lot that was said was not true to get us to believe in it. But you saw quickly that it turned against us. But it was that we don't even exercise what's available to us correctly. I think that a million. Do you understand? I hope when I say this again, as I said, 100 million people are out of work. They have no money. Every one of those people can go into the system, into a judicial system. And it doesn't matter that it's corrupt. That's what you point out. First of all, that's what we're doing at the mining district. First of all, we found that there was the agenda is already on us. The lack of property, the lack of reflection of the law is now upon us. We're in the war. This was, again, the lawsuit was filed over a year ago, and we're now looking at the seat of decision that's the oppressor that's saying, has to look at themselves and say, oh, we are the oppressor because we can't answer this. We can't answer to the fact that someone came in with their right of redress of grievance on a petition and said, you guys are criminals and worse. So notwithstanding that problem, you know what 100 million people without money can go into the court, write a waiver of fees, and now sue against the government in your redress agreement, petition the government in redress. And that's just the courts. I don't know if you know this, you also have the redress to Congress. It's in Article 4, I think, if you look at the Constitution. Again, the contract that they're supposedly, it doesn't exist anymore. We have a much bigger power than walking outside and standing in a big pile of people. Although it's impressive, and I'm glad to see it, I'm really glad to see a lot of people becoming aware of all the crime that government has been. I'm just, it's one of those things, I'm almost smile at some level. We're not even close to being done, but at some level, finally, people are seeing it. Something I've been a dog on the hunt for over 30 years when the rose-colored glasses were slapped from my face. I was so blind at that point about this. It literally, if I can say, I've been blessed to have it happen. But it literally had to be the rose-colored glasses that all you all wear. and you wear them even if you don't, because I tell you, I don't know what I don't know that how I'm being controlled. I just know that I have been, and there's probably likelihood that it's out there continuously and still in other areas. That when the rose-colored glasses had to be literally slapped from my face, I had to face what we see now as daily executions. I escaped by the narrowest of margins, and to this day I could not tell you how, but I did, and that really straightened me up. I said, wow, there's something that's just not right about all this nonsense we've been told. And so we have a long way to go quickly, and we have to really start engaging. But I didn't, and we did this. I can't say we didn't do it. We did it as well. We call it signboarding. I did the protest. We got a group of people that for 3 years stood in front of the county courthouse, giving people we tried to keep our signs to 4 words on a big board so it's easy to read when you're driving by, you try to convey an idea in 4 words or 5 words was the best thing to do, and make them nice and big so everyone can see them 2 blocks away. We've done that. I've sat down the street at least once a week for 3 years. And it does make a little bit of influence, but it hasn't been up until I've really understood I understood the oppression, the occupier, and the system of occupation a lot better in the following years. That I've learned how to address this condition, at least in one level. That I can't tell you what it would do to the system that oppresses us to have those 1 million people, or all the Ferguson and all these other people, the Eric Garner people, all go into their system and just camp out and have their petitions in writing and demand answers, and start out nice. I mean, just keep it rational, keep it within the reality, and keep it within. There's going to be a time for response. Maybe you can back out once you drop your paper, but as they don't start answering, you just come more and more and more. You out these people, not from in the streets. You do it from inside the system, is what I've been telling you all of the time. And the reason why I've said that is because it wasn't until we moved indoors, where you can watch these people on a more one-to-one basis, that you start finding out how powerful that you are. And so I'm asking you to look at what's going on here in these events. They're showing you an example of what's not actually going to work and hasn't worked. It's what happens. It's what goes on. But nothing comes out of it that's beyond what's already been planned. The machine, the system is set up. It's there, it works, and they keep it working because it works. Because there's crickets, folks. There's crickets. In the most easiest places, there's silence. And that's why I ask you, don't get yourself in trouble by going and attacking. Certainly don't take on so much that you get overwhelmed, because this can be quite a bit of work. That's why I say start local to you. You hear William Roberts now being played, the archives for William Roberts being played on UCY.tv. Absolutely listen to what William Roberts had to say. William Roberts heard me on a different, I was asked into, I got myself into another network. He heard me. When he went over to Oracle, he asked me to come. Our messages were highly consistent. His was a lot more formalized. But our message ultimately was pretty much the same, that I want you to listen. He's telling you the inside workings of the history of what went on, where I would come in and tell you that what it's turned into. All that control system, all that system is in place. You can't see it or defeat it from out in the street. That's impressive. That shows solidarity, if I can use the word. I really despise that word, but at any rate, that's the meme that goes on now. It's okay that it kind of gives everybody a belief that something's going on, but you're still a big herd. And the power is in the individual, and I don't mean that in a legal sense. See, all these words have been co-opted, and they have a lot. Again, when you have a language that has more than one meaning in a word, you're living in a fairy tale, because there's really no communication you can make that actually can be understood. That's why your civil rights, the things you think are your rights, Title 42, Section 1981 of the United States Code, gives you, there's a word in there that just fascinated me to find it eventually. Actually, that was more exciting after I got over the dismay of what I was reading about what your civil rights are. I was dismayed that they use a word in there that cannot be used. There's no other definition for the one word. This is what showed me clarity. They can be clear in the law if they want to. But the English, not the American, but the English that we keep adopting and using, I thought we were independent of that, but we keep going back to the mother country for some of us. No, not myself, but I mean from the laws, if you will, the origination of the people that started the so-called founding fathers, and they brought the English. And I said, if you're American, you better start speaking the American. And as we learn about this, we better start making there's going to be a lot more words involved to be a lot more specific. But the word that's in there, if you haven't done so, go read it. Title 42 of the United States Code, Section 1981, says the civil rights, your equal rights, everyone's imposed equally, is the term exaction. Exaction. It only has one meaning. There's no way to misinterpret this one word. It means extortion. And it means wrongful extortion if you thought there could be a rightful extortion. It's fascinating, the mental prison that they have us in, or a lot of us, or in grades. And as we see, we peel the onion in reverse. We start finding out all the layers that we've been consumed by over time. These people, whoever they are, were very, very stealthy. But let's get onto the system of things. For those of you still looking and still not understanding, or even if you do, in confirmation, essentially, what we were telling you about the Ebola, how it's all set up, it's all essentially PSYOPs, a plan. Even if it's not a PSYOP, it's a plan. It's actually a functioning thing. You know, the government's got a patents on all these viruses, and then there are vaccines. You know something's up. But I talked to you about when that first guy that died and that was jetted over to Dallas or wherever he is, whatever he was put on for the Ebola. Remember, he came from the UPS company that was actually on a manifest for the USAID people. That I just used that to explain to you all that this USAID, all these government agencies, are really just instruments of oppression around the world. And so a lot of you know that. I just wanted to point out another one, and it comes back to us where and I don't really care about getting into it too much. What I want people to understand, I guess, more than anything else, is that there is no place right now that I can find that government actually works for us. It works for it. It works for those people and those people's support system that have gone into the seats of the government. Made it look like they're working for you, and they're really self-motivated for lots of reasons. In this case, it's the tyranny, the tyrant, the oppressor, the global dominator of the United States government itself using its instrumentalities. In this case, as I told you, USAID over in Ebola was involved. Watch out. We see all these other... You look through history about these organizations, you see that they're used as they're set up precursor infiltrations that come underneath the fraud, the color of good do-gooder, and are actually just tools, as we find it everywhere. The USAID exposed in Cuba what it tells us about subversion worldwide. Again, I was going to read a little bit. I'm not going to read too much. The title, this is from Tony Carlucci, excuse me. He goes through some things. In a way, you need to read this to confirm that all these conditions are set up by instrumentalities of the United States and other governments as well. So I'm just looking at us for our sake as the United States of America. And those that are in a league with us, our allies so-called, by hook or by crook or by exaction over their lives, as we find economics being a core condition. But USAID, see, core condition, economic aid, also food aid. They deal in the necessities of people's lives, and they deal to overthrow governments and things. And you'd think the United States and its domination would be big enough to deal with Cuba, a little bitty island down there. But it's like this power. The power wanting the absorption of everything, the empire building continues, as you see that they can't even leave a little place like Cuba alone. And this has got to tell you the psychopathy behind this all. But so I'm not going to read any more. USAID exposing in Cuba. You'll get the link. Understand that the USAID it may look like this is like we found out a long time ago about the Peace Corps. I wanted to go into the Peace Corps. It was advertised to us to be a big deal and a good thing, and I certainly believed in all that. And we were of the Kennedy generation. We were all gung ho to serve, do what we could do for our nation and all this kind of stuff. And on its surface, it's these things like all these subversive things, even in the environmental movements. and all this other thing. They look good on the surface. They got a nice skin. They're camouflaged really nicely. But when you reach up, you find out where the tab is to pull the mask off. They're a hideous beast underneath this skin, and I want you to know that. I want you to confirm that for yourself. Again, I don't ask you to take my word for it. I ask you just to trust me enough to at least go down the path I'm trying to send you, to understand, have a comprehensive understanding of at least as comprehensive as you can find of what you might be up against. You have to know really the totality of the battlefield. You can't be fighting over a mountaintop and you find out that it's part of a crater, and the crater and the mountain's in the middle of a crater, and the crater's owned by the occupier. I mean, you have to know the extent that you're dealing with. There's no way to get around this. So these instrumentalities, and so as I've been trying to explain to you, I hope I have conveyed the idea of this international mirror. What the United States and other governments, but in particular the United States, does outside the country is a mirror to what it's willing to do inside. It just uses different letters and instrumentalities to do similar things. I want you to recognize what's happening internationally, that you can turn it internal to you, your so-called domestic, look at these words, folks, domestic. This is like they treat you like their family, and you're going to understand you're part of the corporate family. And if you want to understand about how that word that gets out, it's like the Johnson & Johnson family of companies. This is the United States government and its proxy interest in all corporations that it allows. Just fascinating what they've got around us. So USAID is an instrumentality of the United States government. It's been exposed. Tony Carlucci goes through some information, pretty interesting. Utilizing the hip-hop scene was another thing, an interesting thing to see is, again, language and music, very powerful propaganda tool. And that's another underlying thing you'll see. It's about propaganda. I think a couple of years ago, and I wish my mind worked. I was thinking about this again. My mind's just not working to keep track of all these details like I hear other people do. I used to do that, but life happens to you, and certain things just don't hold up. And I knew the memory was going to be coming at some point, so I'm barely hanging on to what I think is really, really, really important. The dates and times of things, not so much. And this date and time of when we were told, I think it was 2 years ago, that the Congress was allowing for the government to propagandize to you, that it wasn't against the law for the media to propagandize to you. And that's any media, folks. So as we're going to get into today, understand it's alternative media, as I've been questioning that over and over. Almost glad not to be a part of it in a way, although I'm sure that people looking in might think that I am in that regard. I don't know what really I am in that regard. It was powerful to be on a network, but I never thought of it as being on alternative media. I've told you about that. It's really more an independent view of trying to find reality in what everyone tells you is the truth. They're not the same. So the mirror of USAID and using propaganda outside and using music and hip-hop, and this is not just hip-hop, this is just about any medium that's an entertainment, is reflected back to us. And the propaganda, the agreement to propaganda is in the action of the thing that we're up against. I wanted you to see that. Daily now we're hearing, just as we're wondering, people are wondering why everyone's getting shot by the cops, as I've been trying to tell you it's coming. I told you it's comply or die. It's the corporate collective consequence. I wrote an article about that a decade or so and a half ago. It's writing on the wall. All you got to do is read. I got it through the international law and then looking at laws and codes and things like that. Laws so-called, I would say. But anyway, let's not get into all that. I'm trying to move us in and beyond all the nitpicky, nitty-gritty. Again, if you get in a language that has so many meanings, be careful that you get lost in all those meanings thinking you know something, because as I hear other hosts that I got a couple times, was able to hit a couple hosts this week, just for a few minutes, it irritates me a bit. We get lost in the definitions. Definitions are important, but they're only subject matter related to what you're doing that becomes important, not as a generality, because you don't know how those multiple defined words will work in any particular thing. And then when you find out that legal can denounce every dictionary and make its own definition, then you're going to understand pretty quickly what I've been trying to tell you. Get into something and work with it, and work with what you have to work with. Don't make up what you think it is. So USAID has been exposed to being Cuba by hip-hop and propaganda. This is a writing on the wall. You should just take a list, just make a list for yourself of all that you're starting to witness that happens outside the country, turn it inside the country, and say, that's happening to me, and I'm suggesting to you that you're going to have to know about that. Doesn't mean you address it. It doesn't even mean that you talk about it. What you do is you take that and you put that in your hip pocket as a tool, an understanding, an awareness. And when you go in and deal with these people, whoever it will be, on a problem that's confronting you, and you're questioning the authority, and you have, unless they start balking about giving you an answer, then you know you're on them already. That you want to listen carefully to what these techniques are, so you have those tools and filters in your pocket, so you can cut through the nonsense. And this is very important, because I'm working with people that have been thinking that the people in government would help them, and I'll tell you, there's some people in there that are trying to help, and they didn't know their hands were tied. But I come in with looking at the condition. I say, well, no, their hands are tied. They're not going to tell you more than this little area, and they don't know why they can't help you. They don't even know they can't. And you think they can, so you keep digging with them, and everyone seems to be working together. But over years, folks, years, nothing gets done. And it's funny how fast I can come in and look at something, and not everything. Just the things we're working on, the subject matter areas I've been focused on, and looking at some of these techniques and methods of obfuscation, division, diversion, and chameleonism. All these covers, these colors of authority that come at you, these costumes. Looking at how this all comes, and being able to cut right through it is indispensable. You need to see this kind of stuff to be able to cut through that, because it means time. We don't have much of it. And for dealing with people that have been going for years, dealing with the government, I look into it within 3 weeks or so, and sometimes a lot less. It depends on the problem, but certainly within about 3 weeks. Someone who had been going for 2 or 3 years trying to get something done finds out within 3 weeks that was never, ever, ever going to happen. And in the turning, not only do we find out that was never going to happen, but we find out what was supposed to happen. So we out the other one that was wasting our time, and then we get onto the point and we show, in this case, the subject matter I deal with, which is land disposal law and those things, from the mining law, which talks to water and travel and the highway construction and trust law and fiduciary relationships and all that. Fascinating, just endless stuff we should have actually been told. In looking at all this stuff, I can cut right through it, and we expose what the duties, the relative duties and obligations and responsibilities are really quickly. That's a big deal here. I need to understand that. If you understand, I know it doesn't sound like USAID exposed Cuba. Who cares? When you understand its part in a bigger construct of oppression and control, defeating everybody, and you turn that inside, you might start to get a glimpse of why. In fact, I see lots of people, and the people that I deal with, they've been in the chats and things, oh, there's no use in doing all that, oh, that's not this and that, this is how I deal with that. Well, I look at what that is, it's not really dealing with anything. It's just a way to avoid having to deal with it. And if we do that, that's like crickets. I don't know what to say. That's why I try to find something that you find a wrong you need to right, and write it. I mean, that's just how we're going to do this. It may not start big. It may take a while, and you may learn. And I would say, be careful. Don't thinking like you're going to be the guy that's going to, or the woman that's going to change a major oppression against you. You've got to learn a bit of the rules of the battlefield. So I caution you that way. But don't hesitate to jump in with both feet, and persist and persist and persist. Is all I can tell you. You need to know that what's going on, it's not just that the government is propaganda, it's not just that it's bad, it's not just they're psychopaths, it's how they are there. How'd they get there, how they're holding it. And 1 million people in New York in the streets is cool, it looks kind of neat. Finally you get to see at least the Americans are stepping up in what appears to be the numbers that they've been doing all along in Europe, in even Argentina and wherever. Finally the Americans stand up, but on what? And for our system of government, what are they actually imposing or utilizing, if I can say impose, because you have to, it's something you have to impose upon the government to recognize, a right of petition to redress a grievance, not just the right to speak about it. I've told you before, you can be in prison and they'll let you speak until you're dead. They'll let you speak until you are literally blue in the face. They'll stick you in a little room and they'll lock the door, and if you get too much loud and they let that go on and on, then they put you in the chair, they pepper spray you, and then you get to speak through all that pepper spray. You can speak all you want, all you can. but you'll never get out. And this is what I want to tell you. But if you have a right of petition, and with that, I've heard that there's not necessarily a corollary right to hear, but if, as I understand things and justice and all these other ideas that seem to be a novelty anymore, when something is there, it has to have a way to function. You just don't have a right without a way to enjoy it or execute it. You don't have a remedy without a system to look at it. So don't get lost in the fact, well, but it doesn't say I have a right to petition. It doesn't say I don't have a right to an answer. That's implicit. Okay, that's an implicit with that. It's no different than the corollary rights that you have up in the right of freedom of association. You have a right to be in association with people. How many think about the corollary right? You're supposed to also be then by that free from an association. And this is really underpins the concept of consent, doesn't it? That this is the thing we hear more about the freedom to associate instead of from the freedom from association. So when I'm saying I want to be left alone, isn't that what I'm declaring in a way? We don't say it that way, but that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm saying, listen, as an establishment of government and as an agreement that we were supposed to believe that was supposed to be following, notwithstanding that you've tried to, as a government, you've tried to go extrajudicial on everybody, we're not going to allow that. That's our petition of redress of grievance. That's a felony to start with, if not worse. And so we're going to start right here, and I've told you that I want to be free from your association with you. So, and here's the other corollary statement, the amendment statement or the addendum statement is, so unless you can find a nexus, which we used to hear that in the Patriot talk, but don't get lost in that, but unless you can show me, the better term is an application, or some law that physically attaches me, not something conjecture, then I have a right to be left alone. And this is where we start talking about when I start telling you that you need to challenge authority. Need to challenge jurisdiction as well. Jurisdiction to me is first, and then authority. There's an authority within the jurisdiction. I never deny the jurisdiction. I just challenge whether or not it attaches unilaterally or independently or unilaterally. So this is our consent. So again, see all these people out. There's systems that the people are up against that going in the streets is not going to help. I wanted you to see this one. The other thing that's going on is very interesting. We apparently got this supposed Senate torture report. Again, to me, I'm looking at systems, and as I say that, Vicki Davis's channeling reality just pops in my head. Go over to her website. I don't talk with her at all much. She pops up in the emails periodically, but channeling reality, she's a systems analyst. She could help you identify certain subject matters that are systemic, that may help you in certain things that you might be focused on. I don't know if this is so much, but the point is that I'm dealing and looking at systems of oppression, not just the individual there that you're up against. You're dealing in a battlefield literally, and you need to know about that. And you can't win a battle to win the war. You're going to have to persist a little bit better than that. So, and I know that sounds kind of bizarre in a way, but maybe it sounds a little bit hyperactive or something like that. But I just tell you, if you aren't in doing something, or you've done it wrong before, you're going to think that what I've just said is kind of over the top, but it's not. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't jumped in and actually found my way through this battlefield in this war, knowing it's a war. No, never. Again, I've come from the fact that the higher probability is we have always been in a war, and we didn't really realize that. And I mean, all of the people that would listen to me, as old as you might be. We have always been in a war and didn't really know it. And then there was multiple types of wars or occupations as they can be identified. So you got to understand a totality. You don't need to really speak to it. You just have to know you're in it. And that's another key, that when you know that there's a potential to be in it, that's what shows you or limits the amount of things that you can say, but actually fortifies you, because now you're always going to speak on point in the way the oppressor and occupier is listening. And this is a critical thing as well. Like we do coordination, became very, very simple once I realized, after reading quite a bit, trying to get a feel for the comprehensive nature of what this simple little statement in Title 43 of the United States Code talks to in Section 1712, I think it is, over coordination, what that means. What that process is really reduced down to a real simple sentence. It was being a witness as to whether or not a project plan or demonstration is consistent with the law. and that project plan or demonstration is typically agency created. And that's really all this process of coordination. It's just a formalized communication process and communicating your witness as to whether or not something was fulfilling the law as required an agency is obligated to do. That's all that we were talking about. That's all coordination is, essentially. People make all big deals about it. It's really, and then taking that simple view that all we are is witnesses as to whether or not, remember now we're witnesses, that means they're not supposed to tamper with us either. That's a whole other violation. I'm a witness as to whether an official, whatever capacity, is acting consistent with the requirements of law. That's all I do everywhere now. I apply that very simple statement that came out of an analyzing coordination that I didn't actually have that simple before I looked at it. I go, well, this turns down to this simple little thing, and that's usable everywhere. And so I'm a witness. I don't even have to worry much about that. I'm a witness. I say, hey, this is what the law is. We always start with the law. We say it looks like you're acting, or you're planning to act contrary to that. Can you fix that, please, before you run yourself into a culpability, liability, or whatever the heck you want to talk about it? That's all we're doing. And so all these people in the streets, can you imagine a million people going into the system of government and doing this very simple thing? Hey, listen, you're killing people. That wasn't your job. And you're using a colorable excuse. That's a felony. No, I just said something. You need to go find in your state, wherever that is, that how you use a color, where it is in your penal statutes if you want to use those, or your criminal statutes if you want to use it, if they're titled that way. They're titled in quite a few different ways. Find out what the law is for depriving you of a property or a remedy or a whatever, right? An interest in a property under color of authority. And find that's a felony in your state. Find that code. You don't stick that one in their face. First you ask them, will you come compliant with the law? Lately I've been throwing in because I don't want to see a witness that you become a felon. Now, to me, that's a whole lot better way to communicate, and so much quicker. I don't know why anybody can't start that way. So, but you have to understand this is a bigger problem, and these people that are violating you, whether in good nature because they're ignorant, which is no excuse, or intentionally, which you can find pretty quickly and find out by giving them the law, and then they act against you. Now you know you're dealing with a criminal. Dealing with these things gives you the ability to focus in and not frustrate yourself, not be disregarded. Like I hear so many people being disregarded. Not hearing somebody confess to you that they are the criminal and thinking that was an answer and walking away. Like this, again, the Senate report, getting to it. The big story, torture everyone is missing, was a little report I found was interesting. I kind of focused on I just wanted to know what they thought was missing, because in the report, I guess we don't know, right? I mean, it's just made up as it is, and they were going to try and redact things and all this other stuff. And again, the government's nothing but a propaganda agent to begin with, so we're not going to know too much. But what I wanted to know is not just about the report. What was missing in this thing was what it meant. But let me read a couple things that were boldened, and I'll give you the link in the Blogcaster page after the broadcast. And I hope those on the Spreaker. You're getting the raw feed. I don't change that unless it fails and I have to put it up. So you're getting all the whatever is up there, and you don't get to see these links. If you'll look in their bottom, if you go to listen after the fact later today, I'll put a link in your little window. You click on that, gets it over to reallibertymedia.com, and it puts this on the Blogcaster page where all this content is. I ask you to read this again. When you see the black and white in your eyes, as I've asked you to get in your eyes, it's like something you can't unsee no more, and you'll know it's there. And then when you're reading someone's reports, you got to qualify them, but go to the base information. But what I found interesting here on this Senate torture report, I'm not going to get into all the heinousness about it and just what it says about people. When there's no accountability, when there's an excuse in the color of authority that tries to run away from being accountable. As I told you, though, if you do that and deprive someone of their rights, that's a felony. Now, and then like this unqualified one purports to have given immunity to some of these what appears to be war criminals now, and I think we can prove it in very short order here. Is that you now have a felony that's being under color of authority in the unqualified one, is not because I'm qualified, but this has given him the de facto presidential seal that he's got, that he works with, that you can never undo anything he's done because of that. This is another truth you'll find out. Don't worry about it. It's done. Unless it harms you specifically, you can't undo what he did, but you can stop it against you. But that he, not because he's unqualified, but because he becomes the accessory to the felony he found when he wrote the immunity. I don't know that there's a power in that office, even if he was right, to be the accessory to a felony. I don't think there's an immunity for that. I don't think there's a power for that. But see, no one really argues these things or brings it forward. But getting back to what I wanted to point out here on this Senate report and all the heinousness about it, and I just think, I was just thinking about the people that were actually doing the implementation of this. And then when you find out they knew a couple things about what that did or didn't do, it's the height of what we should be rising to stop, because if we're allowing it there, we're allowing it around us everywhere. And again, this is the whole point. How can you be a moral people, whatever your belief, but how can you be a moral, right people, right thinking people, and allow this kind of things on anybody for about any reason, especially when you understand what they admit was the point, which has nothing to do with what we were told. And this is now what I'm saying. There's a report out there, it says something, but it has a meaning. So here, the techniques are based on tactics used by Chinese communists against American soldiers during the Korean War for the purpose of eliciting false confessions for propaganda purposes. This was as commented by Senator Levin, the Armed Services Committee from that report in 2009. I won't read more. I'm just going to read the boldest. McClatchy filled in important details, which is the people who are reporting here from this report. And it says, Cheney and former Defense Secretary Donald H. Rumsfeld demanded that the interrogators find evidence of al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda and Iraq collaboration. So let's quickly go back. It's communist techniques, communist Chinese techniques for developed during the Korean War for eliciting false confessions for propaganda purposes. So after the effect, we can see why Congress, it tells me, it implies at least, says that all of Congress knew that by removing that propaganda, that you don't do propaganda in the news, that making it illegal to do so, legalizing propaganda, lies, fraud, the omission of lies, of truth is fraud. By illegalizing that, they essentially were knowing and setting up the condition that they were going to be using the Congress now. You do think this thing is just a few people? No, this is the entirety of the people in the seats of decision. Every one of them. And I'll remind you again, we've sued the political parties as well. None of them escaped. They're all doing these methods in all different ways and different subject matters. We happen to focus on land disposal and the things that you might understand as sustainable development and things like that. It's for false confessions for propaganda purposes. Congress then lifts the restriction on propaganda through the media. It was already happening anyway, but now they've took off the wraps completely, and so we now know that these people knew, that in the United States, knew that the any confessions they get were for propaganda purposes, whether or not they would have been false. But they knew with this tactic that was done from Korea. Korea's still going on. All right, so this is the kind of little told tale as well. Cheney and former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld demanded interrogators to find evidence of al-Qaeda Iraqi collaboration. So now we're setting up something here. What does that mean, folks? If you think about that, what does that mean? Remember back, if you can, what were they saying at the time? That at the same time, they're Cheney and Secretary Rumsfeld are demanding interrogators find evidence of al-Qaeda and Iraq collaboration. When people kept coming up empty, they were told by Cheney's and Rumsfeld's people to push harder, he continued. Cheney's and Rumsfeld's people were told repeatedly by CIA and by others that there wasn't any reliable intelligence that pointed to operational ties between bin Laden and Saddam. Interrogators at a Guantanamo Bay, Cuba detention facility were under pressure to produce evidence of ties between al-Qaeda and Iraq. What is this saying, folks? at the time? What were they telling us? The more frustrated people got in not being able to establish that link, there was more and more pressure to resort to measures that might produce more immediate results. What were those results ending up to be? That they knew these results were going to be false confessions that they can just bring out as not tell you that they were, for the purpose of propaganda. That's talking to you, folks. All and entirely this whole time, the White House started pushing to the use of torture, not when faced with a ticking time bomb scenario from terrorists, but when officials in 2002 were desperately casting about for ways to tie Iraq to the 9/11 attacks. 2002, folks. They knew. These people in government knew. They had nothing. No, we've all been stating that forever, right? I mean, that seemed to be pretty obvious. I told you my response to seeing the 911 towers coming down was they went and done it. All that evidence that it was coming, and it wasn't going to be from some guy coming across on a little canoe with an AT-GAT gun and carrying it with a camel across the Atlantic to do much. That was all planned inside the court case statements in 1987. So this was not by 2001. I'm looking at the buildings that they went and done it. I didn't know how. I didn't care. They went and done it. That's all I care about. I really could care less of how it was done. All the anomalies and stuff, I could care less. All I needed to do is see that, and I don't need to go any further. I stopped right in my tracks and tried to figure it out. Said they went and done it. Who's they? It wasn't 19 guys in an aircraft because they had explained what it was going to be prior. And it was a setup like you see the FBI doing all the time with these so-called bombers that pop up every once and again. That these things, they say exploitation, not specifically interrogation, is what this really was, and that this is not a picayune issue, because if one were to reverse engineer a course on resistance to exploitation, then what would one get is a plan to exploit prisoners, not interrogate them. And my observation on this is, remember they told the euphemism enhanced interrogation after reading some of the document. And I've got to tell you, I didn't read it. I don't need to continually be sick to my stomach. These people are just evil. It's just that's all I needed to know. That I see little bits in here, pieces about all this is just confirming that these people are just evil. But I looked at it and said, this enhanced interrogation, if I didn't know anything before by looking at what I was reading, there wasn't much interrogation going on for anything to be enhanced. There was a lot of cruelty, brutality, criminality for something that they knew was that generates a falsity for the use of propaganda. What's the propaganda for? But for you, folks. Won't read more. I hope you get this point. They knew this ticking time bomb that was referred to in that article. A Gitmo victim, right out of the mouth of someone who had to suffer this. A ticking time bomb. Intel is falsity. People say anything to stop torture, is what former Bagram Guantanamo detainee Moazzam Beg said, who was subject to abuse and mentioned in the Senate report. So I won't go on. It's just beyond repulsive. I really. This is not my spirit. I don't even know if it's weeping. It's just shocked, and it wants to strangle things. But that's it. I mean, that's the limit of my change, and my hope and change on that's going to happen. That's it. Just my sense of outrage in some regard to see that while we were being fed the propaganda, all lies, and then the omissions, all lies, as a fraud by omission. It's coming out now that people in government knew this, and there was those that helped to facilitate it, to carry it out. And now let's spill it on out to the war, the battlefield America, and all the cops. And we want to talk about, well, you got some good cops. I don't think so. And who was it that was just saying, darn it, these names slipped my mind. Larkin Rose, he comes out, he's been coming out with some pretty poignant thing. Not everything he comes up with to me, it's a lot of it's just talking, but to some points he makes, like he was the one, when's it time to shoot a cop, remember? He was bold enough to say that, well, not that so bold, actually. It was time to say it then, and he was the first to do so. Now, and we see this. When's it time to step up to stop this oppression, this criminal, this evil? When is it going to be you? And you can't, I guess, is the other thing. But all these people are allowing these conditions. And Larkin Rose made a newer video since then. It says all cops are cowards. They're not heroes, folks. This is the cover. This is the propaganda. Understand, they're admitting here the United States is interested in propagandizing to you. So why everyone's out in the streets over Ferguson or Eric Garner when how many other people have been shot every day? I mean, this is where I'm even here. The rose-colored glasses were slapped off my face because I survived one of those things. Not that I was shot. It just went short of that for some reason, and I can't tell you why. I had 5 cops on me with their guns pointed out, and I don't know to this day why not one of them shot me. Maybe it's because they did I won't say it that way. They were just like in a half circle. Might be, and they figured out they didn't quite position themselves quite right. So I survived what people now are not. And yes, I see a higher propensity, a higher ratio of black men, but that's not all. In fact, Florida, in the Keys, a white guy just got murdered by a cop, a traffic issue. So, as we've been saying behind the woodshed, these people, this is just the system. There are almost, I can't find a good cop. The good cops seem to be the ones that get out. They're former cops that acknowledge this problem. Some get out cleaner than others, in fact. Possibly Dorner didn't get out very well, and the other guys, like the one in Oklahoma we heard about, well, he lost his job and they started getting on him, but he was able to kind of fend them off, so he's at a stalemate with them. A couple other people come out and just they're kind of distant enough that they can tell you now, years later. But the government, if you didn't know better, this Senate report to me was screaming loudly that everybody that was in the government, including Congress, allowed all this. So at that point, understand that's the kind of people you're dealing with. And at some point, I don't have an answer for that. What I do have is that now we see who they are. You're not going to forget your political party and forget that you're not a political party. Forget all this neutrality stuff. You either realize that there's people running your life and they're everywhere underneath these political parties. And we focused on our lawsuit on the political parties and the Bar Association. That seem to be the core of the problem. It's not the entirety of it. So there's more work to be done. So you have to know that's what you're up against, and these people are willing, the whole of Congress, and not one of those people, I don't care how good they sound, not one of them is any good, from what I can tell. When they allowed, see, remember, they allowed the funding for this as well. They allowed it to continue and to be continued. So I just wanted to point out again, the intelligence they knew was a falsity, it was for propaganda, and they know it doesn't do any good. It actually creates problem people, which then that's what they use to continue the agenda. Now they have someone that really wants to come after them. They can just use that as the next nightly news, something else they're after. They fraudulently omit to tell you that that's what they created that monster, so-called. Someone just trying to get back in his life, or being used, as we now hear some of these people coming out and they become leaders of is. So, again, this is you were propagandized too. Where's the limit, folks? See if it's done in this one, you have to again jump. You can't. I cannot believe anybody could rationally say that you're going to agree with everything else the government told you at any time. If this is that bad and this is the way they do it on something so heinous, and you saw the cover up, they'll do it at just the drop of a suggestion. They'll propagandize to you. And that shouldn't be good enough, and you ought to be able to step up with a right of petition or redress and find out. It's not only in the courts, it's the Congress, it's wherever in the whole of the United States of America, you can petition, and then you're all over them. You're all over, and you persist until that you get the right answer. When you don't get a right answer, you don't take that wrong answer. You find out how it's a crime what they did to you, and then you bring it to the courts. Why? Is even if there's no justice in the courts, they still have to deal with you. They have to take their time and money and whatever the accounting, the bean counters figure out for them. They only have a small pot. Can you imagine, as I said before, 100 million people in America redressing the grievance of the brutality of the police? Something's going to give a whole lot quicker than what they're doing out in the streets, which really, as I told you last week, fortifies the occupier. That you are under their control, because they always have. We feared for our life, and you didn't do a lawful public order, and apparently they're stealing from you your ability to question that. Which was a discussion. Some people I admire what they say on. Again, I want to give everybody all the credit, but as I listen to people longer and longer and longer, I start to see it's like anybody with a partially understood concept, or I don't even know what it is. Just after what you start out real strong and then you run out. And again, it's real hard to not run out at some point, and that's what's difficult sometimes with the broadcast. Coming up with subject matter and then making sure you're strong on the content delivery. It's the same thing in communicating with anybody. You'll listen to them, and if you listen to them long enough, you see how comprehensive their knowledge is, but after a while, you start seeing that it starts to turn down. I watched the video of Eric Garner about all this, and someone was talking about, he shouldn't have been resisting. Well, it seemed to me, and there was a time in my life, that you had the right to reasonably challenge the authority of the cop with what? You hear him on the TV, on the video YouTubes over the right to travel, so-called, or the probable cause for the stop. You have probable cause. I mean, you had the right to say that. When I listened very carefully, it took a while to find a more complete video. You never hear an affirmative statement of crime. You hear phishing, as I said on a tweet for the Behind a Woodshed is where my account. But a follower, a friend, made a comment about that, and I said, this one sounds like phishing to me. They didn't really make a discernible charge by a relevant witness, by a witness that was, that they could state objectively. And so I didn't hear them state a lawful basis for this. So to me, the other guy that I thought was doing really well, and in fact I mentioned him on the broadcast about being able, he's in a position he knows better than me. He was an attorney, was a prosecutor and all that it started to fall down a little bit, and then another guy comes in and wants to do this analysis, the truth about Eric Garner, and it really has more opinion at some level. You start to hear the opinion. When you look at what the basis is supposed to be, we have the right to initially challenge, and I don't know that when you have an officer that's, certainly now that we see they're just big jerks anyway, at the best they're being jerks. At the worst, you're dead. You're Eric Garner. And then his family. You understand that the ripple, the wave, the tidal wave of oppression that just rolls on everybody at this point. You have the right to confirm that they have the right. That's being taken away from you silently, I think, here. There was must-know facts about the chokehold killing of Eric Garner. Now, I told you at some point I wasn't part of the grand jury. I don't know what they listened to. There's a different standard. All they got to do is show probable cause. My dismay was that they couldn't, where they can indict, or a prosecutor can indict a hamster, and that's a euphemism too, folks. It's not true. I mean, it's not, anyway, it's very little, and most people don't get the kind of grand jury presentation, and both of these cops were put in a grand jury, which an expert, if you will, who knew better than me, said that you just don't do that as a defense attorney, which kind of showed, as I was telling you, that indicates with the lack of prosecution, that was a setup, especially in the Ferguson case, the Michael Brown problem. When they kind of came out and admitted to it, and I pointed that out to you. But here we have, general condemnation of all this, about the chokehold and this and that. I don't know what the guy meant to do, but I didn't hear an affirmative charge. They alluded to some things, and they referenced to some people out there that might have an idea. That doesn't sound to me to be an arrestable offense, and it doesn't seem that any orders that they gave him was lawful. Also, again, on a revenue, a martial law condition, revenue enhancement, martial law, Libra Code, Article 10, when they derive money to fund their system, it's martial law. It says it right in there, folks. It's not hard to understand. I don't know what this guy's intention, but this guy died at the hands of the government in enforcing a tax law, the crime of which was not death in its worst. That there has been also a thing I've noticed in my life, this short life here so far, in the time of nature, this little bitty speck of time we get to see. There was a time when you got a little bit of conversation on the cop before he shot you. Well, the thing was, they never shot you. I mean, they didn't even tase you. They actually thought it was a bit of a challenge to intellectually try to outdo what you thought you did. And again, before, this is a long time ago when I was young, and you're just living by the wits of the street, but it wasn't a crime to be shot. And the cops took great pleasure in out-intellectualizing you, if they could. And then we did our business. We confirmed and we went on. And then they would tell us finally, after they concisely explained what was going on to their reasonable belief, they said, listen, I'm not going to argue with you here. Just take the paper. I'll see you in court. You can do what you want there. And the judge will decide this. Not anymore. This is something, this kind of thing has to be stopped. Excuse me. This article goes through and it talks about this Eric Garner chokehold. The history of the violence of and choking. Prosecutors did something very unusual. I won't go through it because you can read it for yourself. You need to read the analysis yourself. I really don't believe that me just telling you any more than some of this, it really matters. If you're not interested enough to go read what is being analyzed and think about these words, something about reading the words makes a difference than just hearing them. Policy choices. Now, policy, folks, that's just police choices. That's not law at all. That's so far down the line. And if you got a policy choice that's not conducive of the higher establishment orders, like the constitutions and all, you have a right of redress of grievance to get that more in conformity and be consistent with that law. As I say, like coordination. We do coordination in the mining district as an official thing. If you take the very same thing without the power of a government and did it as a government comment, a comment as a redress of grievance on petition of something that you see is not consistent with the law, that would be the same thing, but done without the power of the authority of Congress to have to do so on the government side. You would just have to focus on the redress of grievance and the implicit response requirement and go after anybody for the felony and fiduciary breach when they failed. See, you just start modifying what you're after. They don't want to give you the answer, and you want to give you, and they don't have to give you an answer if you're in the wrong thing. This is what you get at your county meetings. So we don't have to give you an answer. Well, look very carefully. They're telling you the truth. Now, that's not the case when you find them in a fiduciary breach and you give them notice, and now it's a legal thing, a law thing. Now, I would ask that maybe you confront these people privately first, maybe to persuade them, educate them first. But where they start giving you this idea, this song and dance. Well, we've had a policy for 20 years that you're not supposed to do the chokehold, and this guy didn't do anything, and then he gets off. He didn't even get off for jaywalking to go after the guy. See, it was never determined that it was a lawful stop either. But that officer killed someone and doesn't even get. I don't know the charge in New York. Maybe they don't have involuntary manslaughter. Someone died. I don't know of any justification where someone's color of authority that takes away someone's private property, and then let's go to their life, that's a felony. He can't get away without that act being a felony in the least, if we can't get to manslaughter. But to me, the guy died. He died even if the cop didn't intend. The cop's questionable. I don't want to get into all this stuff. I just want to point out there is ways to approach this that I really don't hear a lot of people approaching it. And there's a lot of ways that I hear being described that sound pretty good, but after a while of explanation, they kind of lose their force and effect that I want you to be aware of. You're always checking and testing what you're hearing and what you're seeing. But this little article goes through a little bit of a history lineage. It's in a concise place. Must know facts about chokehold killing of Eric Garner. I think you need to line that up for yourself. Why? I want you better prepared. A lot of people jumping out are using information. You use this information to get you on a track, and then you qualify that track as well, and you define the path for yourself to be as narrow as you can make it, to be what reality you think you can see out of it. But again, there's nothing we can do about not being that jury to give more than what happened. And this is the problem. So now, when you see this stuff, and this is not just Eric Gardner. This has been happening for 30 years. I told you I escaped it 6 months after I escaped this fate. Someone who I told you whose meds had run out came hundreds of miles out of his way, got lost. Happened to see the cops, a state police building, pulls in to try and get help. They feared for their life. They're inside a locked building, and he's outside. They feared for his life. At the end of that day, he dies because they didn't understand him. He came for them for help, and he got 23 rounds in his back. That happens 6 months after I was looking at that fate, and like I said, I escaped that. I don't know how. I was doing nothing. I mean, I wasn't even off medications. Not just traveling down the street. Didn't have a clue about all this stuff that I've now been forced to look at. That has exposed a government that doesn't care about you, that will propagandize to you, that has no qualms. Listen, if they're psychopaths, they have no qualms about whatever crime and evil they will help and promote. That we have to understand these as systemic conditions, so that you can look inside, because what you do is if you hit them wrong, they hit you back with the wrong point, and then the rest of your good stuff gets buried. Like I've said over and over for a long time at the mining district and the mining association, we don't have the luxury of being wrong once. And that's why. And to be not wrong once for a long time is very, very difficult. But I'm finding out if we rely on the law, even the one that looks adulterated, the objective black and white, not by interpretation or opinion by any external opinion of the people that are in the seat of decision, but by the clear black and white. See, if you look very carefully at your current statutes, they say this term, they speak for themselves. That tells you they don't need to be reinterpreted before they're effectual. So the clear language is supposed to be present at all times, and it's not supposed to suffer interpretational problems. Those interpretational problems, if they're there, may invalidate that, or may be required that someone relook into that, but they're not presumed to be invalid. So when you see a law that says that the whole of the code that speaks for itself, there isn't anybody who comes with an authority cannot use the color of the question in order to violate you either. Now, in today's time, when we have psychopathic, I don't even want to insult Neanderthals, but people that were in a condition, in a system that you can be too smart and too psychologically stable to be a cop. That's not an excuse either. That's in fact the plan. You don't want to argue with these people either. Now, when I saw Eric Gardner, he got his hands up. He's talking about trying to get them to explain. They have also a social conditioning that they've put out that he's finally fed up with. He goes, it ends today. He didn't realize how prophetic his words were. Was it? And these people didn't care. And so these are what you're up against, and I think you really need to look at that. Moving on, there was a in the protests. Some of you may have heard an undercover cop draws his gun at the protests in Oakland. Two cops were outed as being undercover cops as inside the protesters. There's a picture. You'll get this. It's what fascinated me about this picture. Not only is the size of this guy. This guy is. I don't know how he didn't stick out in the crowd anyway, but. This guy's got a gun out. It looks like a .45, and he's pointing it out at the crowd. Now, interestingly, he's got his finger straight along the gun, so it's not over the trigger. That's at least one good thing. But that was the other thing I looked at, is that this picture, where if you look at lots of pictures, and this is one of the things that disappoints me to no end, nobody apparently knows how to take a photograph or a video in this country. With all the cameras we have, nobody understands how to hold a camera, what to use it, how to use it, what they do, and anything. So we have a lot of just terrible images. What strikes me as a photographer, as I used to be, I haven't done anything like that lately, is the image quality on this. Not perfect, but I mean compared to all the other things. This is certainly, and you see it, it's newsworthy photography. That we start to do the propaganda setup, plan psyop thing all over again. But this guy's a monstrous guy. He's got his hand on his buddy who's got him. The guy is so big that it's over the guy that's probably an average size, who is laying on top of another guy who outed him. And that's why they attacked this guy apparently. Well, then that guy struck the one of the cops. But the guy with the gun is so large, he dwarfs his other partner, who dwarfs the guy that he's laying on top of to arrest. What I also found out interesting is how quickly these photographs go, that the people in the background were different really quickly. And I don't, again, the anomalies are interesting. But so there's some undercover cops. I guess that's okay. But see, then we have then we have the plan, right? Then we have the poseur. Then we have the imposter. And then we have the inciter of riot, don't we? And when they got caught, they got real in your face. Now, apparently that's policy-wise, that's okay. All the people that are in the street around Oakland, if they were to go into the police department and say, you're going to change that policy, you're not going to put us on the edge of this because you throw yourself into some place that your people walk into this feeling fearful. In other words, we're going to go, you should just make a policy change. That your policy is, if the cop comes out fearing for his life everywhere, he shouldn't be a cop. If he doesn't like the sight of guns, he shouldn't be a cop. That's a Second Amendment right. He should expect to see guns. As I told you a long time ago, the right to bear arms would actually be a license for the government just to shoot you, if it worked that way. Because they knew you have the right to bear arms. It's presumed you're carrying because you have the duty to protect yourself against the government. So these conditions sit with us, that we don't go back down. 1 million people in New York doing the same thing at their police departments, and maybe actually organizing so that 1 million people have their turn. So there's a presence in those government offices forever, essentially, on all these problems, and that not one of you has to get violated. Everyone has to be told individually to not show up again. And then you got 1 million court cases going on for the deprivation of the right of petition and the answer, the right answer, the lawful answer. You just don't expect an answer, you expect a lawful answer. And the follow-up is I didn't research too much more, except for looking at this photograph. It caught my attention how the photography is really well done. The lighting is really well done. The flash is framed just right. It tells a story. It does essentially everything you want for a media shoot. Where every other camera can't take a shot. This guy was in the proper place. Wow, I'd love to be, as a photographer, you're always looking for the instance you're in the right place at the right time, because those are very, very fleeting. And then to capture the essence of the moment, that's a thrill, actually. And that could be all kinds of things. As I'm looking in the chat real quickly, Grimner's saying the undercover pig was never attacked. He was looting and trying to incite violence when he was outed, and they got all pissed off. So this is what I'm saying. This is exactly what we find out is these people doing. This is another condition. Why I was telling you before, be careful when you get out and do that instead of going into the system. How they are in control at some level. They can do about anything to cause a change in these matters. This attitude that they have, this has to be talked about. The petition for the redress of the grievance of a mere policy. We're not talking about a code. We're not talking about a rule that implements a code. We're talking about something far down, way down, like where a guideline and a policy and a manual is. That's supposed to be implementing the lawful delegated authority. This is the hierarchy of how you analyze this. This is how we defeat lots of people. They keep wanting dealing in their rules, and we say, but the rule doesn't apply, because we're dealing in the law. And we state the law. We don't state the code, we state the enactment. And so your rule, or your policy, or your guide, or your manual has to be consistent with this intention out over here that the legislator made. But we've fallen from that, and there's nobody to step in the vacuum to say this is going to stop now. This is our license, if you will. It's prevailing. Now we get to step in without a question, and they can't look at us now and they say, "Oh, we don't agree with you." Now they have to argue that their policy is okay, and then they get to try and get you in an argument. The bottom line is people are dying that have no right to be dead. And it used to, I guess for me, it's looking back and saying, well, it used to be that people got confronted by cops. That was fine, and we did our little dance, and then they asserted the fact that they were going to give us going to have to arrest him. It's not his choice. This is what he's doing, but he's explained it to you. You kind of know that it's kind of ended. There's none of this antagonism, this quarter of a second response and death that there is today that needs to be stopped. It's a mentality now, we see. Again, you can be too smart and too psychologically stable to be a cop. That's not even being coward. That's just a dysfunction that's allowed. That's not me saying it. That's the Supreme Court allowing it. Like they allowed themselves to not question NDAA, which is really helping in extending the Patriot Act and all these other things. And this sets up the military mindset. As I've told you forever, we've been in martial law, actually. The Libra Code, Article 10 tells you that as soon as they started taking revenue and using part of it, there's a disposition of fees statute in every state I've looked. You can find it for yourself in your state. The fees go to a certain, they lay out, they tell you where all the spoils of the war go. It's fascinating if you look at it that way. If you didn't see it before, you can see it now. This is exactly. So they get an attitude because there's no accountability. We get another story, OPD officer to a military veteran, I'm a cop. You understand, you stupid mother effer. Orlando, Florida. I won't read the story. This is an attitude. This is talking to a gentleman who was a military vet. He's actually stationed, and he was a military officer in the military who understood about military policy of police enforcement. But this arrogance, this of control, and the fact that they're going to be protected has to change. You have to look at what they're saying here in these stories. I tell you, this is the news. It's the notice. That you have to look and see that they're telling you they'll lay out in the story the points that you need to bring forward in mass protests and redress of petitioned grievance, not in the streets, to stop this nonsense. This could be you next time. This guy gets beat up pretty good, this military veteran. Sacramento deputy on leave after video shows a beatdown. Sacramento County Sheriff deputy has been placed on paid administrative leave after a video surfaced showing him using his foot to force a man's head against the ground and a flashlight to strike the man. The man was some guy that they knew, the cops knew, nothing special, nothing important. But he said, listen, you're in my way. I can't walk across the street here in the walk. Why don't you move your car? And that got him a beat down. And it's not pretty. So the people, rioting about Ferguson, they should be dealing with this locally to them, and maybe Ferguson won't come to Sacramento County. Can you imagine, just, again, like this gentleman up in Washington, I was telling you, that's pretty brave, going to a Washington cop that's in an unmarked car, saying there's a law that says you can't be patrolling in an unmarked car. And you're going to stop that. That's your warning. And he gets their ID and all. He goes through the same rigmarole backwards that they do to us. That's pretty bold, but that's what we have to do. But more importantly, I would hope that guy stops doing that, because one day he may meet his match and his maker when they set up something because they get tired of him. He needs to get it in writing and needs to go in and petition government for the redress of grievance. And utilize all his good reasons that he's studied the subject matter to know what the good reasons are as a list of harms against him and those similarly situated, and get that changed. All it is just a formalized, these addressements are formalized letters. They taught us in the most basic schools, even the late schools, they're only teaching you how to print, but they're at least teaching you how to print. You still can print. That's all it takes. Probably better than the chicken scratch that I do if it wasn't for computers and mechanical typewriters. So you even ask a cop anymore, you get beat down. You ask them to follow the law, you get beat down. What kind of a country are you living in, folks, here? That you keep watching this and agreeing with. To me, we're just extension of the cops, good cops, if there are any, that continue to allow the immoral behavior. And I say it that way because there's a lawful connection here, besides the fact of the legal license that's been given out, that people have to step up and stop. We cannot be the societal crickets. I keep suggesting that. I can't suggest that more strongly all the time. Why you hear my broadcast open with them to now? It sure looks like we're doing a lot. It sure looks like things are going on, but we're not doing anything that I can see actually. And you think, well, it's all happening over there, it's all happened to the black people in their neighborhoods and all this other nonsense. You don't understand. It's happening everywhere. Acting on a bogus tip. Cops raid innocent family, execute the grandfather as he lay face down. This guy was in his bedroom, called by his wife. A bunch of people come into his house in dark clothing. Bust in his door. His wife just tells him, we've got people coming, I don't know who they are. Then his door gets busted open without notice on top of it. He steps out to protect his family, and they gun him down. And then when he's on his face, they apparently had two more for him on his face, in his back. This guy was a well-to-do contractor. He was an employer also. And SWAT teams came and swatted him. And you think it's way out there. This guy didn't probably even think about this would happen to him, ever. But this has become an attitude. This has become a rite of passage now with all this leniency that these policies allow. Because you'll hear they refer to the policies. You have to attack the policy. When people are dying, it's for no good reason, and it's not because they fear for their life. Again, if you're a cop and you fear for your life by being in the street, you should not be a cop. If you're a cop and you fear for your life because there's a gun around, in whatever shape or form, you should not be a cop. If you do not like that there's people that are going to be talking back at you that don't agree with your authority, then you shouldn't be a cop. A fear for your life is to me, a color of authority that becomes a felony when you move from listening and executing the law to executing people. David Hooks was face down on the ground when he received those last 2 shots, done in Georgia. For all this racism thing, this really just fries me a little bit. Everyone's getting killed, okay? It's just not black people. We hear, I hear a higher percentage is stated in the media, but if you look around, there's people dying left and right. And this has got to stop, or else it won't. Kayate says, only low IQ need apply. Absolutely. If you have a higher IQ, then it comes above the standard, and I believe that standard's above 100, and it's actually is better at 80. Then you will not be a cop. Remember the court cases. Just find them. You seek them out. You can not believe me. You can believe me, but if you don't understand the condition, you don't understand what to speak to. When you find out what their conditioning is, then you have to go and say, well, your standard now is now gone so low, it's lost relevance. You are no longer in the capacity you take your oath to bind your service to my expectations. We get another former police talking about this. We might get a term here, as I keep reading again. This nose gives us integration with what the jargon is inside of the special language. As protests are up over police killings of unarmed African Americans, one former police chief is experiencing a painful case of deja vu. Norm Stamper's concern about the abuse of power by law enforcement is rooted in a personal experience. He resigned as Seattle's police chief after the 1999 World Trade Organization talks in the city exploded into violent confrontations between police and protesters. I'll take to my grave the way I handled that, said Stamper, who served as a police officer in San Diego and Seattle for 34 years. He is the author of a book, Breaking Rank. In a telephone interview from his home in Washington State, San Juan Islands, nice, huh? Stamper warned against what he sees as a shift by the nation's law enforcement agencies from the community policing principles to cooperation and trust building to an occupational force mentality. Quote, occupational force mentality. That's a term, occupational force mentality. They went from bad to worse. Community policing, I don't know if you've looked at the Supreme Court cases on community policing, but that allows a cop to come in your house if the cops deem it's for the sense and the safety and the caretaking of the community. It's the law. I told you we were looking at the traffic laws, and the court's coming back and say under their community caretaking, they can violate your rights. That's what they say. So it went from community policing, which was principles of cooperation and trust building. What's the problem with those? If you understand these terms, and not when you look in the dictionary, but how they're actually used in the system, you'll understand the problem. What's cooperation and trust building? I thought we already had a trust built by the cops to serve the public and keep things in peace. Well, that's not the trust building they're talking about. See, they don't recognize that prior thing, the thing they took their oath to, regardless of what it actually applies to. And this principle of cooperation, remember I'd keep talking to you about coordination? You know there's a lesser status in coordination, which is where you meet as equals, at least, with the government as far as the authority to make a plan and make sure it's lawful. That's what coordination does. It allows governments and the tribes and districts to come and meet with the agencies to focus on the greater view to make sure that each governmental interest is met, that the plan meets the law as well. It meets the needs and the law. That's coordination. Within coordination, there's other statuses. One is cooperation. And that's where your rights are subverted to the decision of the superior, which happens to be the agency that you're dealing with. So these terms that they use in these articles are telling you perfectly what's going on. What I want you to understand is now we know they went from community policing, which is already bad enough, into occupational force mentality. I would change the word force to violence because there's no basis for it. This is what the new world order is about. This is what the new sustainable development is about. So here's terms that we need to start understanding. They went from community policing to occupational force mentality. Certainly can't be any better. I won't read any more. I just wanted to point that out. It's right here. The former police is telling us. He's also telling you that way back when the WTO was there and how he handled that, he was wrong. Now, what does that mean? That's your license to say, hey, listen, that guy was wrong. I'm seeing you guys today are doing the same thing. And this is my petition to redress that grievance. And you are going to answer to it. Not give me excuses. If you give me excuses, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to enjoin that. It's a simple suit, folks. Injunctions are kind of interesting. They're really simple. And they're really quick. I mean, you look at go look at the federal rules for injunctions. They got 2 to 3 days to respond, and the decision has to come in 14. Well, unless you are suing the seat of decision, and then it takes, in our case, a year and a month, or 2, or whatever it's been now. And we keep plodding along. We keep focusing and plodding and stay on our path. And they can't stop us. So they start doing funny things to our case, which has been interesting. But I'm not going to discuss more. The point is that you don't give up and you don't take no for an answer when you can find the objective basis says different, and you find their language and you use it in the proper way and you stick it back in their face. Your policy, essentially, that you talk to on this, of what has been described by a former police officer as occupational force mentality, is not consistent with the law or the outcome we need, which is people living with some sense of peace and an expectation of justice. Now, I just threw some words out. You can turn them to whatever you want. You can take my lead. You can just look at the whole thing and start afresh in a different direction. Come at them from a different way. But the point is you're going to have to come at them. Otherwise, more people are going to be dying. And more people will be propagandized. And if you thought that the torture report was somewhere out there where NDAA just took away all your rights, I think you better rethink your plan. were so well played, it's astonishing to me. Even me. I mean, this is what got me. I think this is what captured me so well early on, 3 decades ago. How well I'd been played. When I say about getting the rose-colored glasses slapped from my face, it wasn't even like I thought everything was all rosy. I understood there was corruptions. I understood things weren't quite right. But when they were to the level of taking someone like myself, that I don't have an intention, negative intention, okay, I kill bugs. I kill parasites, all right? I don't like them. I've seen no purpose for them, and maybe in the future, in another reality, I'll be explained why those were even around. But until then, I don't live with a mean, unpeaceful, or a criminal heart, or anything like that. And to have someone like that's what I realize when they come against me. When these people come against me, it's almost as if you look at, well, I'm good in that regard. I don't go out and intentionally hurt people, and these people are hurting me. These people are evil, and they're cowards. Because they're not going after the guy who actually is like them either. I guess competition's, there's enough business out there that competition's not so guarded that they're fighting each other. But that's, again, we have to step up. Well, I always say have to, and then it flashes in my mind. No, you don't need to say that. We don't have to step up. But I don't want to hear anything about the future, about how bad it's become. Already as bad as it is. It can get a whole lot worse. Just look at the torture report as your future, folks. This infiltration by this cop, where he's actually inciting, as I said, inciting violence. I was inciting the riot, inciting the violence, actually doing some looting apparently. This subversion in the system is replete, and this is why why I say you got to just pull back and look for your own. You really have to do your own things. You really have to start studying on your own, because you don't know where the deception is. That I don't look into some of these things, but one of the people that I listened to. I know why it was. I was trying to figure out why would I even be there, because I don't know. The guy's broadcasts seem to be kind of repetitious to me and don't really go anywhere for me. It's certainly not. Again, I'm so focused on subject matter that I am. I really have to stay focused on what I do. So any subject matter outside is kind of, I look at it really quickly and say, well, that's not really helping me here. I'm not getting a new insight on the things I need to see. But it was. I think I have on my Twitter. I'm following. Who is that? Gerald Celente. And he twitters out, and I happened to get on the Twitter when he put out he was going to be on the Rents broadcast. So I jump over on the Rents just to see if there's anything new he's saying. And so far, I'm not hearing anything new from him either. The trends, the guy. I mean, again, when you're looking at this and you're involved in it, you see all the trends yourself. As I told you earlier on, I wrote an article. It's a corporate collective consequence: comply or die. That was written a decade and 15 years ago. It's still happening. I mean, we're in it, right? So this is not hard to see. But he had someone on a broadcast after Celente that I've heard a little bit, and I've seen some problems here and there. And I told you I wasn't too sure about it. But I continued to listen. It was a broadcaster named Pete Santilli. Apparently, he's on their network, and apparently, this other guy that was. In the news as well, a chief, I think it might have been out of Pennsylvania. I really don't keep that close to this, so excuse me if I'm not all, concise on all this discussion. It's just out there. It bothers me, is why I'm talking about it. Why we have to be very careful of what we hear our information, and who we get it from, and who we trust. And why I tell you, just trust me enough to get you to a path, and then take that path. And I just have enough trust in me that it's not going to waste your time on that subject matter, if you choose that path. And I'll tell you what I know for the extent, and then you can find all the new stuff I didn't have a chance early on when I was coming through to see that, or that wasn't important for me to do to support me today. That this police chief Mark Kessler, as I'm getting from the Guerrilla Media Network website, this is Pete Santilli's website, betrayed America. Pete Santilli live Fox News Radio with on Alan Combs. I guess Alan Combs is on Fox. Well, he discusses this on the Rents show. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I really don't like judging people, and I'm not really judging him here. I'm going to tell you what I sensed. And we've talked about this before, and we got there was other people people that I stopped trusting as well. Suzanne Posel, and then there was Vinny Eastwood for his fun as he could be, outrageous as he could be. They got in it with Santilli, and I said, listen, there's something going on that's wrong. This is another psyop as well, it seems. There's something that's just not right about this. Well, I just need you to know, and I'm not going to judge this. I want you to find that Rentz broadcast, and I want you to listen to Santilli explain this, and the cluelessness that Rentz seems to have about some of this stuff, and my cluelessness in listening in, but saying, wait a minute, that he is pointing out this Mark Kessler the Santilli states that Kessler fooled Santilli, and Santilli gave him space and encouraged him to do media and broadcast. Santilli was the conduit to get this guy out, to get his message out. And Kessler becomes, by whether he's truthful or a lunatic, he was apparently working with the government as an informant. And he states a court case in Georgia. The point is here, everybody got deceived by someone who could be a lunatic or someone who was working with the government. And it seemed to me that Rentz broadcast, it was actually, it just came slowly over me. I said, this sounds like it's a co-op. This is a closing of the case. This is bringing credibility, if you will, to Santilli for bringing this guy in to go do what he did. It's as if there's two actions in the same plan. This guy was supposed to come out eventually, and then they had to cut ties with Santilli, so he comes out and says he was duped, when he was the conduit for most all of it. I guess I'll say that's my question. What I came away with is we're all listening to, if we listen to them, see, that's why I tell you, I don't listen to lots of people, but I hear lots of people do. If I was to go off of what I heard on Rentz, I would think that we're in a continuing psyop condition, and they are actually moving this thing along, and everyone's going to look, oh, this guy, here's all the evil was in Kessler. And whether or not he was inside it, he was duped as well. So all these people that allow themselves to be front runners and essentially fearmonger, is what I can tell. Not really telling what you can do about it. Just beating the drum that something needs to be done, and here's the thing to go do, and it's really not always the same thing. It's not even the thing it's not the thing you need to do. There's no, like the Bundy, Santilli was involved with that. That was no follow-through. I'm going to tell you the Bundy thing is real. The Bundys themselves, the paperwork, their rights and all that, through someone I trust, absolutely. He's seen their paperwork. That's real, that part. And they have some rights, and that's why you haven't seen much going on, and the government's trying to go back to the back door and try to put an area of critical concern over the top of it to try and do it another dastardly deed. But the Bundy paperwork on their rights sits there. It's fact. What they did, this escapade around that, and who was involved, highly suspect. And so I just want you to point out, it just bothers me, and that's why I'm even talking about it, otherwise I probably wouldn't. There's something happening here in this Kessler thing, and it's still going on, that I want y'all to just put it in your mental box. There's a ton of people that are so-called alternative media. They're either clueless, dupable, or in on it. And you need to be aware of this, again, even through secondary information if someone says something to you. That my problem with it is I see lots of people involved in it. They're involved in it whether or not it's a dupe. They're not doing the things they need to be doing. They're listening to this nonsense. Even if he's innocent of all just flat got duped himself and all that, and now he's going to lick his wounds over it. All the time and an advantage the government got between the time it started and today, and the contribution by other networks to all that, didn't accomplish anything, did it? It actually put us backwards. That I'm needing you to know. You need to know that's part of what we're doing. It's partly why I don't get out much, if you will, and look around. It's partly what I tell you when I say I listen long enough. Sometimes it's only a few minutes. Sometimes it may take quite a few minutes. But it is certainly only minutes that the people that are making the content, presenting the content, start running out of substance, actually. Always words, but not substance. And if, again, markonthebeast.yahoo.com. If I'm doing that, that's why I ask you to contribute to the Great Intelligence Matrix, how I pull this stuff together to bring up for you things we need to be aware of. If you so choose to take the bull by the horns and stop the nonsense and the killings and all this other interference with a way of life that, even if it was promised, is at least a better focus that we can grasp than what we have today, despite the promise. We're not going to get there by not reaching for that point. We're not going to get there by agreeing in the first instance to any of this. If the military now, in the police, we call it police, but the military enforcement is not going to allow you to challenge them in the street. And I don't mean an argument. I mean demand the probable cause and the good reason and the witnesses thereof and the witness of the cop, and everyone has a little card in their hand and says, well, this is what you're required. In fact, the new policy will be that you're, as a police department, are going to issue this card, and it's going to have everything we need. So we pull the card out, and we get to have these answers before you pull a gun. Then maybe we're going to get a lot closer to the cops going back to where they are without the unnecessary rigor that becomes something that the system itself, whether by jury, grand or petite, will not enforce and make accountable. That has to change. We cannot stand by, as if we want to claim to be a moral people, we cannot really stand by and watch that. We need to assert where there's failings in other places that you haven't seen in your county. You go and you make a list of the failings in another place, and you walk to the law officers and whatever, the commissioners whatever the code officer is, and you say, are you acting consistently? What's your policy? Are you acting consistently to allow this, or are your rules and policies made to avoid this problem? And if you find out it's made to allow it, you say, then I want you to change it, and then you stick on them like a dog on meat. Maybe a bone, because that lasts a little bit longer. Because you have to do it. You cannot. Each one of us, if we choose to live in the world coming up made for us, I don't know what to say. If we don't choose that, we can't be crickets. I've proven that over and over by many, many ways to say so. I don't even want to go back and talk about it. And I wouldn't even know where to tell you to go look in the archives. One of my failures was not having such a better formalization of presentation where I can go back to, this is the episode that we talked about this. I try to put in the titles enough to kind of capture my mind. In fact, it works, because I go back and put what I thought I said, and it's in the caption if I did it right, and I can go back and find my old stuff that way. So, but I didn't do it by episode or by class or by rule, by chapter and verse, which kind of is not very helpful, and I know that. But I don't know what else. I'm not that organized, and I don't have anybody around me to help me be that organized. But you're going to have to do it yourself, because as we found out, you can't go to the system of oppressors. The Bar Association, who we sued, is in the seat of decision, and their members are the ones that decide the seat of decision. It decides all of this stuff, from what I can tell. And then their members go over to the legislative side, and they make all the rules and the laws at that point. And so I ran across a little, and you have to know this, and this is what we're facing, and so I have to put this into our calculator as we move this case, because we sued these people, this violent seat of decision, society engineering type of people. On a global scale they are. This Bar Association, International Bar, has a court system set up, and it's supposed to be a remedy, but it's not. And people haven't quite figured it out. They just know that it's tough, and they don't get the decisions. They don't understand why. See, I have an insight, not all of it why, but I have an insight as to why. And this is what makes our case a lot different. And it's proving itself out is the interesting thing. But the outcome that we will see is not readily recognizable by most people, because they believe in a delusion. But we are looking here, and you need to know, 1% of the lawyers filing appeals to the Supreme Court account for 43% of the accepted cases. Most represent corporations. Now, what occurred to me here, a little bit more technical look. Only 1% do 43% of the cases. There's 17,000 cases filed by this article, roughly. That means the rest of the attorneys that are out there are going to be divided amongst the 17,000 cases, and I'm sure they have some criteria that they haven't explained to any of us about our case as we move into the Supreme Court. And I've been at the Supreme Court quite a number of times, and I've found out that that the clerks are gatekeepers. You can't even get a court case looked at by a justice through Rule 22 by these people, who have been given more power over your case than you can ever imagine. And so it would be great if we had a whole lot more people coming after this and to sue for it. But we're looking at this as we move along, that we have gatekeepers. If you notice, we talked about lawyers. I don't know if there's a lawyer one out there. They're all attorneys. They're all members of the bar, more importantly. And it doesn't ever speak in this title, and not even into the concept, that they ever consider what you might hear as a status of called pro se. No, that's the only one they recognize. There's others. They only recognize that one because pro se means you represent yourself. Now, how do you do that? See, we don't represent ourselves in the context of the bar, but they've got this thing all turned around. And so they force you into these statuses, which we argue, and I've learned to come at them in different ways so they can't do that. In other words, our case isn't one where we're coming with a question. We're coming with an agreement between the parties. And all they're supposed to do is certify the agreement. So we have a violation, at the most innocent, we have a violation of contract at the judiciary. But we're probably not going to get into the Supreme Court. And here's why. 1% of the lawyers filing appeals are 43% of the cases. The rest of the percentage is divided by 17,000 cases, and we're not trained, and they really don't look at our stuff. And I don't know, you tell me how many so-called pro ses actually get their case heard, actually. That you have to know that that's what you're looking at. That corporations are ruling the day. And that means that if you can't get in, see, I look at this and I say that if we can't get in because of this, it's like a crapshoot because it's on certiorari, which means they get to choose. That means you probably don't have a remedy. If that's the case, that's a fiduciary breach where you're required to have a remedy. And I hear crickets. People don't understand the end game has been already figured out long before AJ came by to say what the end game was. And it's the system and the parts in the system that are crickets against, that keep maintaining their power. And what you see rolling on us is the oppression and tyranny you find, because you don't say anything about it. No, I'm bringing a more technical thing. Not many people see this. When I saw this report, I said, well, this is exactly, I've heard this before, but here it is in the notice. It's just a notice to us. This is your odds of getting into the Supreme Court. Does that mean we don't go through that? Well, no. We actually do everything we can. We follow what criteria we can find. We have quite a bit. We learn how to speak. We learn to read the rules. It tells us to apply a certain way. We do that. We show how we can do that. If we get denied, guess what? We've got a whole bunch of other remedies to go on. It's just a functioning in the system. Do you know what 1 million of us doing this would do to that system? Saying you guys are corrupt? You guys can't even follow your own rules? The rules are for justice, and you only apply them on me when it means that you get ahead? When you deny the obligation of remedy? If I have a right of a petition, I have a right of a remedy. You can't deny that. Now, that petition has been said that it has to go to the Congress, but that's not necessarily the case. It's pointing things like that out. Go look at Article 4. It tells you about things like that, about when to go to Congress, and if they're not in session, you go to the President. It's all laid out for us. Not all, but a lot of it, the basics. So everyone says, well, there's no remedy. You're right at some level, but it's no remedy because no one stopped the lack of remedy. No one attacked that part. What's your remedy for a cop going from, hey, put your hands up, you're under arrest, to shooting you? What's your remedy there? When do you get to go to the cop, to the policymaker? You don't. So you better get that done before. As I told you, like Jesse Ventura, the blowhard, was told by the courts, well, this is an administrative matter. We don't yet have jurisdiction, as we heard in the other case last week. We don't have jurisdiction over a directed verdict, the appellate court said. In Jesse Ventura's case, well, we don't have jurisdiction. It's not ripe. This is an administrative matter. If you want to challenge the standard operating procedure, go address the TSA. And he came out screaming and yelling, and it was all promoted on wherever he could get to promote him, that he got his constitutional rights violated. And for the most part, we live in an administrative society. That's why I also focused on the disposal law. There is no administration at the disposal side. And yet we live in an administrative society. That's a breach on its face. And if you understand how to look at these matters, it's a pretty direct route for purposes of outing the criminals. You don't bring a question. You bring the fact, and you bring the substance, and you bring the bestest form as you can, and don't let form be an excuse as they try to throw on you. As if I explained to you, you can any rule, when it gets down to the courts, any rule that violates a principle of a privilege or a right or a remedy or causes you harm or prejudices you, that can be waived. They're simply guidelines to guide the case along in the most efficient manner. That's all those rules are about. And that they use them as killers. And again, in knowing that, addressing your paperwork in that regard, they're flummoxed. They don't even know how to respond at some level. They start doing stupid things, administratively stupid things, and you just keep catching them up. What's the advantage of that? Well, if we had more people, then it would take more notice, and maybe they'd stop it. So, we're one drop in the ocean, but we are that drop. Now, we're quite a big drop, actually, to tell you the truth, because once the cases come out, once you get the proof and you get together with other people that can then get the court of public opinion up, once we can become the Fergusons and the Ferguson and the New Yorks, but done inside the system to get rid of, to throw out these occupiers, we're in a lot better day. I can't tell you that solves it, because I don't know what new problems we'll create for ourselves. We really are kind of screwed up as people. But at least we get rid of the oppression. An oppression that's, I've noticed, also talking about corporate interests and their influence in the states and all that. Somebody put up this thing: leaked emails that reveal MPAA plans to pay elected officials to attack Google. This was also, it reminded me of the Kim.com problem. I think he's involved with this group. And I don't remember now, this has to do with the Motion Pictures Association or something, actually getting involved with attorney generals, that they have an association, again, legal entities and associations that have influence on people that are in office, that their rights become more influential inside the policy and prosecution of the government than your voice may ever be. That you have to look at this. This is notice to you of a dysfunction that needs to be corrected. For Kim.com, and I don't know if it's direct, but I could sure see a lot of corollary. They're talking about Google here, what they call Goliath. Then if you look at the way that they're doing it, this would actually, they're talking about people like the mega corporation and all this for servers and the transmission of information. That these Sony Pictures hacks, the importance of it wasn't the hacks, it was that what it's telling us about the system. That you need to know, first of all, what you're up against, why it isn't going the way you thought it's supposed to go, and be able to then petition for redress of that grievance where you find the harm it does to you. Those are like three basic things you need to do to get done and advance yourself. You go leaps and bounds, you start doing these kinds of things. Lobbying, burying gifts, pursue attorney generals. Now, I mean, if we didn't know better, we have this idea, well, here's the story, the report on it. This would be one of the first, if I was going to go talk, and we've talked on our sessions, when we were at the legislative sessions talking with the government, and engaging the legislative sessions, and we were told, because of the information we brought, we showed the legislators that they were being lied to, that we needed to meet with the agencies, that their agencies showed up, and then their attorney general shows up to defend as an attorney for the agency, defend the agency from, state its position. That we outed the attorney general as being corrupt as they come. They were misstating the law. We could clearly explain that on the record. We clearly showed it out. We clearly find out she's politically oriented. I didn't know about this pursuing attorney general's backdoor dealing. I now have a whole list of stuff about why that is. It's actually party driven. So guess what? The suit that we have to enjoin these people is party. We sued the parties. It doesn't matter which party they're involved with. This is going to stop. Tied to our cause, we have the back door on this to shut this door. You can too. I didn't know this before. I just bring it now as evidence. So the news is the notice, and they tell us how it's set up if we would just pay attention. There's ways to get around oppression and censorship. There's ways to get around the idea that the corporations have more advantage. They have advantage because you've allowed it as a people. The last week we talked about the censorship on that video that was we need to talk about Sandy Hook. You know, it's just a bunch of people doing earnest research trying to tell you what's going on. And at that time, it was shut down. It was shut down about everywhere. There's a false again, copyright claim being made, or some harm that they claim that came underneath the use statutes. And I told you, listen, go to this site. It was the archive site, and download this thing, or if you can host it, please do, because they're shutting this out. And I watched it. I finally was able to watch it. I couldn't find anything that would come close to what would be a reason to shut this thing out. And so this was just simple censorship. Well, the link I gave you for archive.org last week is now says the item is not available due to issues with the item's content. That's it. So censorship, you can't get it. But I did ask, and I ask and you shall receive, and I have to thank really quickly, within a couple days, Grimner over at Real Liberty Media has made a page, and so now we can see it through a player, which I appreciate as well, because I was having some trouble with getting it ability to see that. Again, I have my stuff locked so far down for intrusions and tracking that sometimes I can't see stuff so easy. But this player is over here. I'll give you the link, reallibertymedia.com. We need to talk about Sandy Hook, the full documentary. As I understand, it's still there. I won't click on it now. It's quite long. It's like almost 3 hours. So Grimner has been gracious enough to post it. To put it up, and so you get to see it. If you want information on the propaganda that goes on how you look and how you think, how you analyze. I mean, some questions were kind of novel to me, and people getting ideas to go look in other places inside the content of what the propaganda was to find even more clues as to an ever-expanding issue and problem. Even if it's not a hoax, you can't go past square one on a lot of these things. And I came away from the video, that guy Vance that was over there, the state police officer, and it probably doesn't help that we have dealings with state officers in lots of places that are just as corrupt. That guy really, I mean, I came away with the worst feeling about that guy, and notwithstanding all the other problems. But talk about someone who's fallen on his face, failed the duty of the people. Just looking at how again, no different than the 911, they haul off half, all the evidence. What was that, folks? But again, the video that was on archive is now no longer. But the people have now also got their own website up as well. I think you might be able to find that. The point is that this is a rare, wanting to be made a rarity. It's a censorship that's going on. And if you are interested to find out, I use it as tools on how they're doing it to us. I'm not so smart. These criminals are a lot smarter than me, and they tell you how they do it. You just got to be aware enough to be able to see how it's done. And so that goes into your bag of tricks and filters so that you recognize when someone's doing that to you. Because if you don't have that, at minimum, you're wasting a lot of time. You're just wasting a lot of time. And you're not outing them for the criminal that they are, whether or not you want to say that in the first instance. I try not to. I'm getting less and less patient, but in the first instance, I try to find the best, the innocent part, and then I quickly turn to identify that it couldn't be, and then we move from there. And that has a lot of force and effect all by itself, because you're now showing them you're capable of finding the point, and it becomes a point of harm by an act that's not supported in law. It's inconsistent with the law, contrary to the laws of the United States is better, because that by the courts has been declared to be a war on the United States. So all this stuff that you see coming down that's not consistent with the law and it happens to be a federal law for sure, is a war on the United States. You can prove the war around you just by those that you allow to harm you against the law. Another thing of a deception that's been going on, again, remember the torture report admitted that they were looking for evidence they never had when they were telling everybody they had it. We all knew that, but here's the proof. Again, it's the proof, all right? I'm trying to get you to see it's not what we're talking about. It's not subject matter. It's what that subject matter evidence is, that it's evidence, that it's not just a discussion. It's not an opinion. It's to be used in some action that you're taking. Boston bombing, lots of stories there. No proof. Tying star knives to triple murder, feds admit. So here we are years later, a year or two later, and now the feds are admitting that the Boston bombing is much more important than has been acknowledged, principally because it is the defining domestic national security event since 9/11, and has played a major role in expanding the power of the security state. I found that interesting, the security state. You're all secure. You don't realize that they secure you by putting you in a prison. For that reason, who, what, and why is continuing to investigate the troubling aspects of this story and the establishment of media treatment of it. There's your propaganda, right? What you're told. And you said that they're going to do it on the torture stuff. They're going to do it everywhere. Well, we will be exploring new elements of the story regularly as the January trial of the accused co-conspirator Zohar Tsarnaev approaches. Now, they go through a ton of stuff here. Again, a lot of research. I don't have the time to really do it, to get into it, but if you're looking for, looking into what the FBI has done and then shows you is willing to do, here's evidence of it. And I would then translate that over to the influence that they'll put on a local government or police department. And that this is should and continually show you right now there is no honor in the government whatsoever. It's just not. Not because I want to say it, not because I want to see it. It just is. And if we didn't have the proof, the news, the notice will tell us that. The research that's going on with people looking and asking interesting questions of obvious things, exposing what kind of went by everybody for a long time. So the Boston bombings, if that's no good, if there's problems there with the FBI information, you know, right there, I'm just going to go, I think the whole thing was a mess. If I didn't know, I'm talking if I didn't know better. Well, if the FBI is willing to do that, what are they not? I mean, what's the line, folks? Where does it stop? But you start finding there is no. Illinois just made it a felony for citizens to record the police, and the media is silent. Well, so are the crickets, folks. We are silent. Illinois has been, I don't even know how anybody lives there, to tell you the truth, what I've been reading out of that place. But, you know, they've been hit, I think 2 or 3 times that their so-called wiretapping recording statutes have been found to be unconstitutional. They're trying it again. You people need to step up and challenge that. I don't, as I read a little bit through it, I don't see how their new one is any better. And this is underneath the First Amendment, again, on the right to associate and the right of the press, which now gets extended. And I don't know why the press, the people, were excluded, folks. This is what they tried to do. But it's coming around that the legislature will make crimes things that they can't make crimes. So we live under a system engineered to say that it's presumed lawful what comes out of a legislature. And we have found, the Jefferson Mining District and those of us looking at it, have found those people are criminals. And they said they gave them a color of an authority of right that's wrong. It's crime. We stepped forward to do what we could. You know, we're still in this. I don't know where this is going to go, but boy, we're open and talk about cans of. I mean, we got cases and cases of this stuff opening up on them. Otherwise, I'm hearing crickets. And until we start doing a little bit better, I mean, like more what we're doing and getting in their face one-on-one nicely, be respectful, I guess. Be noble about what you're and simply, the simple statement is, I'll close here by saying, the simple statement is, your proposed plan or your action appears inconsistent with this provision of law. I want you to make your actions consistent with the law. And then listen to their noise and say, well, if you don't bring it consistent, I will have to bring you into a court where you're going to explain it there, and until then I'll enjoin your action. And besides, if you are doing it illegally, you're misappropriating public funds. Let's just throw that in there. So you have a way to speak to these people. It's really that simple, actually. It gets worse. The occupier will take overtime, do more and more, and they don't care if it's ripping you up, ripping you off, obstructing your law, obstructing anything. So thank you for tuning in today. We'll talk with you next week, hopefully, and stay tuned to your networks, and appreciate coming after live with Vince. That was pretty cool to come in after somebody that I knew. Finally found out through the chat rooms that was somebody that I'm following. And trying to speak to these things as well, just to get you to see there's a different ways to look at all this. But contribute, if you will, as you can to all the networks. Keep the servers running. Again, Grimner was kind enough to put up that broadcast. You know, that took a time to do and to find it. And he's going to now face whatever the idea is to try and censor that. So we'll talk with you again next week. You all have a good week as we run through this thing, and consider what the wrong you need righted, and do it, and then persist until it's done. You all have a warmer day than I think we're going to have. and take care of yourself. Watch out. Be prepared.